The plane filled quickly, passengers shuffling past each other in the narrow aisle, jamming bags into overhead bins, settling into seats with that particular mixture of resignation and impatience that characterizes modern air travel. A flight attendant walked through the cabin, checking that seatbelts were fastened and seats were upright. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom with the standard welcome message, informing them that they would be pushing back from the gate momentarily, and that the flight time to Miami would be approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes. Marcus plugged his phone into the charging port beneath his seat and selected a playlist, ready to zone out for the duration of the flight. Linda, meanwhile, couldn't relax. Every muscle in her body was tense, every nerve on high alert. She kept waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to realize what she had done, for security to storm onto the plane and drag her off in handcuffs. But nothing happened. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway, and with a roar of engines that pressed everyone back into their seats, lifted into the Colorado sky. Denver fell away beneath them, the airport shrinking to toy-sized proportions, the Rocky Mountains visible in the distance like jagged teeth against the horizon. Linda closed her eyes and tried to convince herself that the worst was over. But she was wrong. The worst hadn't even begun. The flight proceeded normally for the first hour. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle offering drinks and snacks. Passengers reclined their seats and dozed or read, or stared at tiny screens. Marcus had fallen into a light sleep, his head resting against the window, his phone playing music through his earbuds at a volume low enough that even he barely heard it. Linda had ordered a vodka tonic, then a second one, trying to calm her nerves with alcohol. It wasn't working. Her mind kept returning to those documents, kept imagining scenarios where everything fell apart. What if Marcus decided to rearrange his suitcase mid-flight? What if he opened it to grab something and found an envelope that clearly didn't belong to him? What if he was the responsible type who would immediately notify a flight attendant? Linda's spiraling thoughts were interrupted by a commotion several rows ahead. A passenger was standing up, gesturing frantically at the overhead bin. A flight attendant hurried over, and Linda could hear fragments of their conversation over the ambient noise of the plane. Something about a bag, something about the wrong suitcase, something about baggage tags being identical. Linda's heart stopped. She leaned into the aisle slightly, trying to see what was happening. The passenger, a woman in her 30s wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, was pulling down a black rolling suitcase from the overhead bin. She was insisting that it wasn't hers, that someone must have taken her bag by mistake and left this one instead. The flight attendant was trying to calm her down, explaining that this sometimes happened when bags looked similar, that they would make an announcement and sort it out. But the woman was becoming more agitated, claiming that her bag had important medication inside, that she needed it during the flight. Linda felt her mouth go dry. She looked up at her own overhead bin, suddenly gripped by a terrible thought. She had been so focused on switching the contents of the suitcases, so consumed by fear and desperation, that she hadn't paid attention to anything else. What if in her panic, in those frantic 30 seconds at the gate, she had made another mistake? What if she hadn't just planted evidence in Marcus's bag? What if she had accidentally taken Marcus's entire suitcase and left him with hers? No, that was impossible. She had been careful. She had only opened the bags long enough to transfer the envelope. She hadn't switched the bags themselves, had she? Linda tried to remember the exact sequence of events, but her memory was fuzzy, distorted by adrenaline and fear. She had unzipped her bag, grabbed the envelope, stepped toward Marcus's bag, unzipped it, shoved the envelope inside, zipped both bags. But which bag had she rolled away with afterward? Her hands were trembling again. She needed to check. She needed to know for certain. Linda pressed the call button above her seat, and a minute later, a flight attendant appeared, a young man with a patient smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Linda kept her voice steady, friendly, just another passenger with a simple request. She explained that she needed to check something in her carry-on, that she thought she might have forgotten to pack her reading glasses. The flight attendant reached up and pulled down her suitcase, handing it to her with a practiced efficiency. Linda set the bag on her lap, her fingers fumbling with the zipper. The bag felt wrong somehow, lighter than she remembered, or maybe heavier, she couldn't tell. She unzipped it slowly, dreading what she might find. The first thing she saw was a yellow basketball luggage tag. Linda's entire world tilted sideways. This wasn't her suitcase. This was Marcus's suitcase, which meant that Marcus currently had her suitcase, complete with all her belongings, her identification, her business cards, and worst of all, absolutely no evidence of the crime she had committed because she had successfully planted that evidence in the bag she was now holding. She had switched the bags entirely, not just the contents. In her panic and haste, she had made the very mistake she had been trying to avoid. She had taken the wrong bag. For several long seconds, Linda couldn't breathe. She stared into Marcus's suitcase, seeing his neatly folded clothes, a laptop in a padded sleeve, some snacks, and there at the bottom, the manila envelope she had planted. The irony was almost funny in a sick, twisted way. She had successfully framed an innocent teenager, but she had also left all of her own possessions, including her identification, in the bag he now had. If she tried to claim this bag was hers, she would have to explain why her ID was in a different suitcase, why all the clothes were men's clothes in a size far too small for her, why there was a basketball luggage tag with the name Marcus Chen written on it in neat handwriting, Linda, zipped the bag closed with shaking hands and signaled for the flight attendant to return it to the overhead bin. Her mind was racing through options, none of them good. She could say nothing, wait until they landed, and then what? Marcus would open his suitcase, find all of her belongings, and immediately report it to airport staff. They would check security footage, see the two of them in line together, see the moment when bags were switched. Or she could come clean now, admit that there had been a mistake, claim it was an innocent mix-up between identical bags. But if anyone looked too closely at the timing, at the way she had positioned herself near Marcus, at the deliberate nature of the switch, they would realize it wasn't innocent at all. Then a third option occurred to her, an option so audacious and ruthless that even she hesitated for a moment before committing to it. What if she didn't try to fix this? What if instead she leaned into it? She could accuse Marcus of stealing her bag. She could claim that he had deliberately taken it, that she had just discovered the switch, that she wanted airport security to search both bags when they landed. The beauty of this plan was that it flipped the script entirely. Instead of her being the criminal trying to smuggle stolen documents, she would be the victim of a teenage thief. And when security searched the bags and found her belongings in the suitcase Marcus had, it would look exactly like what she was claiming. He had stolen her bag. Of course, there was a risk. If security looked too closely at the timeline, at the gate footage, they might see through her story. But Linda was betting on chaos and confusion, on the natural assumption that teenagers were troublemakers, on her own appearance as a respectable businesswoman who would never lie about something like this. She had built her entire real estate career on reading people, on knowing what they wanted to hear, on selling them stories that made them feel comfortable and safe. She could sell this story too. She had to. It was her only way out. Linda waited another 20 minutes, letting the plane cruise at 30,000 feet, letting passengers settle into the dull rhythm of flight. Then she stood up, her face arranged into an expression of distress and disbelief. She walked forward up the aisle, moving slowly, letting people see her, letting her presence register. She stopped at row 12 where Marcus was still sleeping peacefully against the window, his earbuds in, completely unaware of the nightmare that was about to descend on him. Linda reached up and opened the overhead bin above his row. She pulled down her own black suitcase, the one Marcus had taken by mistake, and set it in the aisle with a thump loud enough to wake several passengers, including Marcus himself. Marcus blinked sleepily, pulling out one earbud and looking up at the woman standing in the aisle with confusion written across his young face. Linda's voice was loud, deliberately loud, pitched to carry across the cabin and attract maximum attention. She demanded to know why Marcus had her suitcase. She said she had just gone to check her bag and discovered it was missing, that someone had taken it, and now here it was in the overhead bin above his seat. Her voice rose with each sentence, tinged with manufactured outrage and shock. How dare he steal from her? What kind of person did something like this? She wanted answers immediately. Marcus's confusion deepened into alarm. He stammered that he didn't know what she was talking about, that he hadn't taken anyone's suitcase, that his bag was right there above him. But when he stood up and reached into the overhead bin, his hands found Linda's cream-colored designer suitcase instead of his familiar black one with the yellow basketball tag. His face went pale as he pulled it down, staring at it like he had never seen it before in his life. which of course he hadn't. Other passengers were watching now, some with concern, others with that eager interest people get when witnessing conflict that doesn't involve them personally. Linda pressed her advantage. She unzipped her own suitcase right there in the aisle, pulling out items that were clearly hers. A makeup bag with her initials, a laptop case, business cards with her name and photo. See? This was her bag, and this teenager had it, which meant he must have taken it. She turned to the gathering flight attendants with tears in her eyes, real tears she had summoned through sheer force of will and desperation, saying she couldn't believe this was happening, that she had valuables in that bag, that she wanted security waiting when they landed. Marcus was shaking his head frantically, his voice breaking as he tried to explain. There must be some mistake. The bags looked the same. He would never steal anything. He didn't even know who this woman was. He held up Linda's suitcase as if it might somehow prove his innocence, but it did the opposite. Here he was, holding a bag full of someone else's belongings, his fingerprints literally on it, while she held his bag with his clothes and possessions. From an outside perspective, it looked damning. The flight attendants tried to calm the situation, suggesting that perhaps it was an honest mistake, that identical bags got switched all the time. But Linda wouldn't accept that explanation. She insisted that her bag had been fine when she boarded, that she had checked it right after takeoff, that the only explanation was deliberate theft. The senior flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and an expression that suggested she had seen every possible variety of passenger nonsense, made the decision to separate them. She asked Linda to return to her seat with her recovered suitcase, and she asked Marcus to remain in his seat with the bag he had. She assured them both that airport security would be notified and would meet the plane upon landing to sort everything out. Linda nodded, satisfied, playing the role of the traumatized victim. She thanked the flight attendant profusely and returned to her seat, her mind already working through the next steps of her plan. Marcus, meanwhile, sat back down feeling like his entire world was falling apart. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He felt the eyes of other passengers on him, some sympathetic, others suspicious. He kept replaying the moment at the gate in his mind, trying to remember if he had done anything that could have led to this mix-up. He had grabbed his suitcase, or at least he thought he had grabbed his suitcase. It had been right next to him. The handle had felt familiar. The weight had seemed right. But now he had this woman's bag, and she was accusing him of theft, and security was going to be waiting for him when they landed. His parents were going to freak out. His grandmother was expecting him. This was supposed to be a simple trip, his first solo flight, a chance to prove he was responsible and mature. Instead, he was being accused of stealing from a stranger. The remaining 2 hours of the flight were agony for Marcus. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the sick dread in his stomach. He kept looking at the cream-colored suitcase in the overhead bin, kept wondering how this had happened. The passenger next to him, an older man with kind eyes, leaned over at one point and quietly said that these things got sorted out, that if it was really just a mistake with similar bags, security would figure it out quickly. Marcus wanted to believe him, but the way that woman had looked at him, the absolute conviction in her voice when she accused him, made him feel like maybe he really had done something wrong without realizing it. Linda, for her part, was simultaneously relieved and anxious. She had successfully deflected suspicion away from herself and onto Marcus. But now she had to maintain this story through security questioning, through bag searches, through whatever investigation might follow. She mentally rehearsed her account of events, making sure every detail was consistent. She had boarded the plane, put her bag in the overhead bin above her seat, and hadn't checked it again until mid-flight when she needed something. When she went to get it, she discovered it was gone. She had walked through the cabin looking for it and found it above the teenager's seat. Simple, straightforward, believable. The fact that Marcus actually had her bag in his possession made the story even more convincing. The plane began its descent into Miami, the skyline appearing through the windows, the turquoise Atlantic visible beyond the city. The pilot announced their arrival, asked flight attendants to prepare the cabin for landing, and Marcus felt his heart sink even further. The moment they touched down and taxied to the gate, this became real. There would be security officers, questions, possibly even police. He had never been in trouble in his life, had never even gotten a detention at school. His parents had always told him that how you handled problems defined your character, but he had no idea how to handle this. He hadn't done anything wrong, but how could he prove it? The plane landed smoothly and pulled up to gate E17. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began standing, stretching, gathering their belongings. But before anyone could move into the aisle, the senior flight attendant's voice came over the intercom asking everyone to please remain seated for just a moment. 2 Miami-Dade airport security officers boarded the plane, their presence immediately commanding attention. They walked directly to row 12 and asked Marcus to please come with them. They were polite but firm, and their very presence confirmed everyone's worst suspicions. Marcus stood on shaky legs, grabbed the cream-colored suitcase from the overhead bin, and followed them off the plane, acutely aware of dozens of pairs of eyes watching him go. Linda was asked to come forward as well, and she did so with her own black suitcase, playing her role perfectly. She looked shaken but determined, like a woman who had been wronged but was strong enough to face it. The other passengers watched this drama unfold with the fascination of people watching reality television, grateful it wasn't happening to them. Once Marcus and Linda were off the plane, the remaining passengers were allowed to deplane, many of them immediately pulling out phones to text friends and family about the excitement they had just witnessed. In a small security office near the gate, Marcus stood with the 2 officers and Linda, his entire body trembling. One officer, a broad-shouldered man named Officer Rodriguez, asked him to explain what happened. Marcus told his story as clearly as he could, his voice shaking but honest. He said he had boarded the plane, put his suitcase in the overhead bin, and fallen asleep. He woke up to this woman accusing him of stealing her bag. He had no idea how the bags got switched. They looked similar, and there must have been a mix-up at the gate or in the boarding process. He would never steal anything. This was his first flight alone, and he was going to visit his sick grandmother. Please, he just wanted to get to the hospital. Linda told her version next, her voice steady and convincing. She described discovering her bag was missing, finding it above Marcus's seat, seeing her belongings inside. She stopped just short of directly accusing him of deliberate theft, instead suggesting that maybe he had taken it by mistake, but then realized and panicked. She was willing to accept it might have been an error in judgment, especially from someone so young, but she needed to know that her belongings were all there, that nothing had been taken. Officer Rodriguez exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Chen, a woman with sharp eyes and an unreadable expression. They asked to search both suitcases, and both Marcus and Linda agreed. Officer Chen opened Linda's cream-colored suitcase first, the one Marcus had been in possession of. She methodically removed items, clothes, toiletries, a laptop, business materials, all clearly belonging to Linda Westbrook based on the names and initials on various items. Nothing seemed to be missing. No red flags appeared. It was exactly what you would expect from a business traveler's carry-on. Then Officer Rodriguez opened Marcus's black suitcase, the one Linda now had. He pulled out folded t-shirts, jeans, a laptop in a sleeve, some snacks, a USB drive, a warm blanket. Standard teenager stuff. Linda watched carefully, her heart rate increasing. The stolen documents were in there, buried beneath the clothes. Any moment now, the officers would find them and this entire situation would shift dramatically. Marcus would be caught with documents that had clearly been stolen, that had no business being in a teenager's suit. Officer Rodriguez reached deeper into the bag, his hand pushing past layers of clothes. His fingers found something stiff and rectangular. He pulled out the manila envelope, looked at it with mild curiosity, and turned to Marcus. What was this? Marcus's face showed genuine confusion. He had no idea. He had never seen that envelope before. It wasn't his. Officer Rodriguez opened the envelope and pulled out the documents inside. Property deeds, financial statements, bank account information, all bearing the name of Eleanor Morrison and an address in Denver, Colorado. The officer's expression changed immediately. This was no longer a simple case of mixed-up luggage. These were legal documents, financial documents, potentially stolen documents. He looked at Marcus with new suspicion, asking how these ended up in his suitcase. Marcus was shaking his head so hard he felt dizzy, insisting he had never seen them before, had no idea where they came from, didn't even know who Eleanor Morrison was. But his protest sounded weak even to his own ears. The documents were in his bag. How else would they have gotten there? Linda played her part beautifully. She gasped when she saw the documents, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. She said she couldn't believe it, that this was so much worse than she thought. That this boy wasn't just a bag thief, but apparently involved in some kind of identity theft or fraud. She had never seen those documents before, had never heard of Eleanor Morrison. Officer Rodriguez was already reaching for his radio, calling for additional support, potentially detectives who handled identity theft cases. This situation had just escalated from a baggage mix-up to a potential felony. Marcus felt like he was drowning. Nothing made sense. Those documents hadn't been in his suitcase when he packed. He had packed everything himself, had checked and double-checked that he had everything he needed. Someone must have put them there, but when? How? The only time his bag had been out of his sight was during the security screening process and when it was in the overhead bin during the flight. His mind raced through possibilities, and then something occurred to him, something that made his blood run cold. What if this woman, this Linda Westbrook, had planted those documents? What if this entire thing was a setup? But even as the thought formed, Marcus realized how insane it sounded. Why would a successful businesswoman plant stolen documents in a random teenager's suitcase and then make a huge scene about bags being switched? It made no sense, unless she was trying to hide something, unless she had been caught with those documents and needed someone to blame. Marcus's lawyer instincts, inherited from watching too many crime shows with his father, kicked in. He asked the officers if they could check the airport security footage from the gate before they boarded. If someone had tampered with his bag, it would be on camera. Officer Chen looked at him with slightly more interest. That was a reasonable request, and they would indeed be reviewing footage as part of their investigation. But in the meantime, Marcus needed to understand the seriousness of the situation. Documents like these didn't just appear in suitcases. Someone put them there, and right now, all evidence pointed to Marcus being that someone. Linda interjected, her voice dripping with false sympathy, saying that maybe Marcus had gotten involved with the wrong people, that maybe someone had asked him to transport these documents without telling him what they really were. She was giving him an out, a way to claim he was duped rather than deliberately criminal. But Marcus didn't take it. He insisted again that he knew nothing about those documents, that someone must have planted them, and he wanted to see the security footage. Officer Rodriguez made the call to airport surveillance, requesting footage from Denver International Airport. Gate C-42, from approximately 3 hours earlier. It would take some time to pull the footage and review it, but given the nature of the documents found, they were treating this as a serious investigation. Marcus was asked to remain in the security office. He wasn't under arrest, but he wasn't free to leave either. Linda was thanked for her cooperation and told that they might need to speak with her again, but for now she was free to go. She had a local Miami address, was a U.S. citizen with no apparent connection to the stolen documents, and appeared to be a victim in this situation rather than a suspect. Linda gathered her cream-colored suitcase, expressed her hope that the situation would be resolved, and made what she thought would be her grand exit. She had done it. She had successfully transferred blame to Marcus, and while part of her felt a twinge of guilt about destroying a teenager's life, her survival instinct overpowered any moral qualms. She would go home, destroy any records connecting her to Eleanor Morrison, and move on with her life. By the time anyone figured out the connection between her and those documents, if they ever did, she would have plausible deniability. She had been nowhere near them. They had been found in someone else's possession. But as Linda walked toward the exit of the security area, Officer Chen called out to her. "Just one more thing," the officer said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Could Linda confirm her flight details and boarding sequence? Just for their records." Linda turned back, her smile still in place but her stomach tightening. "Of course," she said. "Flight 2847 from Denver to Miami, departed at 1:15, boarding group 3. Officer Chen thanked her and made a note, then asked where Linda had been sitting on the plane. "Row 18, seat C," Linda answered. And where had she stored her carry-on? In the overhead bin directly above her seat, Linda said, exactly where she always stored it. Officer Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And when did she first notice her bag was missing?" Linda repeated her story, about an hour into the flight, when she had gone to retrieve something from her bag. She had reached into the overhead bin and realized the bag there wasn't hers. She had walked through the cabin looking for it and found it above the teenager's seat in row 12. Officer Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She thanked Linda again and said she could go. Linda walked out of the security office, her confidence slowly rebuilding with each step away from that situation. She had pulled it off, but Officer Chen wasn't satisfied. Something about Linda's story bothered her, a small inconsistency that kept nagging at her. If Linda had stored her bag above row 18 and Marcus had stored his bag above row 12, how had they gotten switched in mid-flight? The overhead bins weren't interchangeable. Passengers didn't typically go rummaging through bins 6 rows away from their seats. And if the switch had happened before boarding, at the gate, why would Linda only notice an hour into the flight? Why wouldn't she have noticed immediately when she tried to store her bag or when she sat down? Officer Chen pulled up the seating chart on her tablet, confirmed the locations, and made a decision. She told Officer Rodriguez they needed to see that security footage immediately, not in an hour or whenever surveillance got around to it. Something was wrong with this picture. 20 minutes later, Officer Chen and Officer Rodriguez were in the airport surveillance office, watching footage from Denver International Airport's gate C-42. The timestamp showed the boarding process for flight 2847. They watched passengers scan boarding passes and file down the jetway. They watched Marcus Chen, clearly identifiable by his age and the yellow basketball tag on his suitcase, scan his pass and head toward the plane. And then they watched Linda Westbrook. Linda appeared on camera about 30 seconds after Marcus. She was in boarding group 3, as she had stated. But here's where things got interesting. As the camera angle switched to show the area just before the jetway entrance, there was a crowded moment where multiple passengers were bunched together. A woman ahead of Marcus had dropped something, and Marcus bent down to help her. During those 30 seconds, Linda moved closer to Marcus's suitcase. Her body blocked the camera's view somewhat, but her movements were deliberate, purposeful. Her hands went to both suitcases, hers and Marcus's. The angle wasn't perfect, but it looked very much like she was doing something to his bag. Then she stepped away, and when the crowd cleared, she was rolling a different suitcase than the one she had arrived with. Officer Chen replayed the footage 3 times, zooming in as much as the resolution allowed. There was no question about it. Linda Westbrook had deliberately positioned herself near Marcus Chen's suitcase. She had done something to both bags during that moment of distraction. And then she had taken his suitcase and left hers behind. This wasn't a random mix-up. This was